My name is Natalie Owens. I'm 31 years old. 6 weeks ago, I stood in the banquet hall of the Westfield Grand Hotel, holding a glass of sparkling water, watching my father wrap his arm around my stepbrother Marcus and say to a table of 15 colleagues, "And this is Marcus, my real son, the one who actually carries the Owens name forward." He said it loud. He said it proud. He said it like I wasn't standing 4 feet away. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I just smiled and took a slow sip of my water, because what my father didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 3 of the people sitting at that table already knew my name. Not because of him, because of me. Because I had spent the last 14 months quietly building something he couldn't take credit for, and the HR director of his company had been one of the first calls I made. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe, but only if you're genuinely enjoying this story. And drop me a comment. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love knowing who's out here with me. Now let me take you back to where this really started. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, in a house that always felt like it had a guest room, except I was the one living in it. My dad, Robert Owens, remarried when I was 9 years old. My mom had passed 2 years before, and for those 2 years it was just the two of us, and in my memory, those were actually the most honest years we had together. He was present. He was mine. Then he married Diane. Diane had a son, Marcus. He was 7, 2 years younger than me, and from the first week he moved into our house, something shifted that never shifted back. My dad. Quiet, ambitious, an operations manager who measured everything by outcomes. He liked winners. He liked results. He liked people who made him look good in public. Diane. Warm on the surface, strategic underneath. She never said anything outright cruel. She was too smart for that. She worked in impressions, in small adjustments, in the slow drip of redirection until suddenly you looked up and realized the whole room had been rearranged. Marcus. Athletic, charming, average in every measurable way. But he wanted what my father had to offer, and he was willing to perform for it. Me. I was my mother's daughter. Quiet, studious, not great at performing. I did my work. I kept my head down. I assumed eventually that would mean something. I was wrong about that for a very long time. When I was 12, I won the regional science fair. My project was a working water filtration model, and I'd spent 3 weekends building it. My teacher called my dad to tell him. He said, "That's great." He did not attend the ceremony because Marcus had a rec league basketball game that same afternoon. He took Marcus. He took Diane. They got Dairy Queen after. I rode home with my teacher's assistant and ate a granola bar in the back seat. I told myself it was fine. Science fairs weren't a big deal. At 17, I got into Ohio State's honors program on a merit scholarship. Full tuition. My counselor called it exceptional. My dad said, "Good, that saves us money." That same month, Marcus was accepted to a mid-tier state school on a partial baseball scholarship, and my dad hosted a dinner party for 12 people. He gave a toast. He cried actual tears. "My son," he said, "is going places." I sat at that table and ate my chicken and told myself that different people showed love differently. When I was 24, I got my first real job at a logistics firm in Cincinnati. I called my dad to tell him. He said, "Good for you," and then asked if I could drive Diane's mother to a doctor's appointment that Friday because Marcus had a work thing. I drove the appointment. I missed my own first-week orientation dinner because of it. I didn't tell anyone that part until much later. I kept a quiet record in my head of all of it. Not out of bitterness, I want to be clear about that. I kept track because somewhere in me I was still trying to understand the math. Still trying to figure out what I was doing wrong, what I could adjust, what I could offer that would finally make the balance sheet feel even. The math never balanced, and I kept adding numbers to it anyway. The real break came 18 months ago, just after my dad's company announced he was being promoted to Regional VP of Operations. It was a big deal, the biggest of his career. He called me, which was unusual enough that I actually sat down when I saw his name on my phone. "I'm having a dinner," he said. "The company's honoring me. I want family there." My chest did something it hadn't done in years. Something open. "Of course," I said. I'll be there. Diane's handling the guest list, he said. She'll send you the details. The details came by group text, 10 days before the dinner. The Westfield Grand, Saturday the 14th, cocktail hour at 6. Dress code, formal. And at the bottom of the text, a job attached to my name in parentheses. Natalie, can you help with coat check and guest arrival? We want it to feel organized. Coat check. They wanted me to work coat check at my own father's promotion dinner. I stared at my phone for a long time. I thought about responding. I thought about all the ways I could word the thing rising in my chest into something civil. Then I thought about my mother and what she would have wanted for me, and I put the phone down and made a different kind of decision entirely. I texted back, "Sure, happy to help." Then I opened my laptop and started making calls. Let me explain something about my job because this is where the story turns. For the past 3 years, I'd been working as a corporate partnership coordinator at a nonprofit workforce development organization called Elevate Central Ohio. What that means practically is that I spent my days building relationships between companies and workforce programs, convincing HR directors, hiring managers, and operations leaders to invest in talent pipelines they hadn't considered before. I was good at it. Patient, thorough, unflappable in a room full of skeptics. One of my longest-running partnerships was with a company called Paragon Logistics Group. They were a mid-size regional firm growing fast, and they'd been working with us for almost 2 years by the time my dad's promotion was announced. Paragon Logistics Group was also the company that had just hired my father as regional VP. I had not planned that. I want to say that clearly. I didn't engineer it or seek it out. I'd been working with Paragon's HR department, specifically their Director of Talent Partnerships, a woman named Sandra Reyes, for 22 months before I ever made the connection. It was Sandra who mentioned, in passing, that they were welcoming a new VP from Columbus, a man named Robert Owens, and that they were planning a dinner in his honor. I went still for a moment. Then I said calmly, "I actually know him. He's my father." Sandra looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. Warm, careful, reading the room the way smart women do. "He's never mentioned you," she said. Not accusatory, just honest. "No," I said, "he wouldn't have." That conversation was 3 weeks before the dinner. Sandra and I talked for another hour that day. Not about my father, but about me. About my work. About the programs I'd built. About the partnerships I'd formed with 13 companies in the past 2 years, and the 247 people who'd moved through those pipelines into stable employment. She'd seen the results of my work for nearly 2 years, but that was the first time she fully understood who was behind it. At the end of the conversation, she said, "I want you to meet our CEO before the dinner. I think you two should know each other." I met with Paragon's CEO, a measured, precise man named David Keller, the following Tuesday. The meeting was scheduled for 30 minutes. We talked for 2 hours. By the end of it, he was asking about expanding our partnership, bringing Elevate into a formal 3-year contract, and whether I'd be interested in joining Paragon's advisory council for their workforce initiatives. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for exactly 24 hours. Then I called Sandra and said yes. None of this touched my father. None of it involved him, borrowed from him, or needed him to validate it. I had built it the way I built everything in my life, steadily, without announcement, in the spaces no one was looking. He had no idea. The dinner was on a Saturday. I arrived 45 minutes early, per my instructions, stood near the entrance in a floor-length black dress, and greeted guests as they came in. I hung coats. I handed out name cards. I smiled at everyone. Sandra arrived at 6:15. She saw me at the coat check station and her expression shifted, something between understanding and something harder to name. "You're here helping," she said quietly. "I was assigned this," I said. She nodded slowly. She didn't say anything else, but she moved her seat. By 6:45, the room held about 30 people, company leadership, a few board members, regional colleagues, family. Marcus sat at the head table next to my dad. Diane was in the seat of honor to his left. I was seated at the far end of the second table, between a junior HR coordinator and an empty chair where someone's +1 had apparently canceled. The speeches began at 7:30. My father stood at the podium looking exactly like the version of himself he'd always been working toward. Pressed suit, silver at his temples, the comfortable confidence of a man who believed he had built the life he deserved. He thanked the company. He thanked his team. He thanked Diane. He thanked Marcus, and that's when he said it. "And this is Marcus." He gestured toward the table, beaming. "My real son, the one who actually carries the Owens name forward." Laughter from a few people who didn't know better, and then silence from the people who did. I counted 3 beats, looked at my water glass, looked up. Sandra was watching me from across the room. David Keller, seated 2 seats from my father, had gone very still. He was looking at the program in front of him, the event program Sandra's team had printed, which listed the evening's guests, including the members of Paragon's new advisory council. My name was on page 2. I don't know exactly when David Keller made the connection. It might have been when my father sat down and Diane leaned over to explain, audibly, to the woman beside her that Robert has a daughter from his first marriage, but she's not really involved in the family. It might have been when Marcus stood to give a toast and mentioned he was hoping to get into logistics, looking at my father, and my father said, "We'll make that happen, son." It might have been when David Keller turned to Sandra and said something quiet, and Sandra replied, and he looked across the room at me with an expression that was not pity. It was recognition. What I know is that by 8:15, David Keller had walked over to my table, extended his hand and said, "Natalie Owens, I wasn't expecting to meet you here." "Small world," I said. "Your father's dinner," he said carefully. "Yes," he looked at me for a moment. "You know, when Sandra told me about our partnership coordinator, the one who'd grown our talent pipeline by 63% in under 2 years, I asked her what her secret was." He paused. "She said it was you. Said you were the most reliable person she'd worked with in 15 years. I kept my face steady. "Sandra is generous." "Sandra is accurate," he said. "I'm looking forward to working with you more formally. Your father must be proud." I picked up my water glass. "You'd have to ask him." David nodded once. He understood. He went back to his seat. Across the room, my father was watching. I don't know exactly what he heard. I don't know how much of that exchange registered through the noise of the room and the wine and his own satisfaction with the evening. But something shifted in his face. Something careful came into his eyes. After dinner, during the informal portion, he crossed the room to where I was standing. "Who were you talking to?" he said. Not unkindly, just off balance. "David Keller," I said. "Your CEO." "I know who he is. How do you know him?" "I've been working with Paragon for almost 2 years," I said. "Through my organization. I run their workforce development partnership. Sandra Reyes is one of my primary contacts." My father stared at me. I watched him process it. "You never said anything." "You never asked what I did," I said. "You asked me to handle the coats." He opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm on the company's advisory council now," I said gently, without theater. "As of last week. So, technically, you and I will be in some of the same rooms going forward." I set down my glass. "I'm glad you got the promotion, Dad. You worked hard for it. I hope it's everything you wanted." I picked up my coat from the closet, the one I'd hung myself, and I walked out. Sandra texted me on my way to my car. "You were the most graceful person in that room tonight. By a wide margin." I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes. Not from devastation, the way I once would have, just from the particular exhaustion of being finally, completely done hoping for something that was never going to come. My father called the next morning, then again that afternoon. I let them both go to voicemail. On the third call, 2 days later, I answered. "I didn't know," he said. "About your work, about Paragon." "I know you didn't." "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that question for a long time before I answered it. "Because you never created space for me to," I said finally. "Every conversation we had was about Marcus, about your career, about what I could do to help the household run. There was never a moment where you sat down and said, 'Natalie, what are you building? What do you need? What are you proud of? That conversation never happened, Dad. Silence on his end. I didn't know you felt that way, he said. I know, I said. That's kind of the whole thing. That was 6 weeks ago. We have spoken twice since then, both brief, careful, neither of us fully sure how to stand in the new shape of things. I'm not looking for an apology that comes from embarrassment rather than understanding. I'm not waiting for a recognition that only arrived because his CEO noticed me first. What I know now, at 31, is that I spent 22 years trying to earn a place at a table that was never going to be set for me. And while I was doing that, I accidentally built something real. Something that had nothing to do with my father's approval and everything to do with my own quiet, steady work. The advisory council had its first meeting 3 weeks ago. My father was in the room. He introduced himself to the group, and then, when the facilitator went around the table asking each member to share their role, he looked at me when my turn came, genuinely curious, maybe for the first time. And I said simply, I run workforce development partnerships. I've connected over 200 people to stable employment in the past 2 years. I'm glad to be here. He didn't say anything after the meeting, but he didn't look through me either. For the first time in a very long time, he looked at me. Actually looked. I don't know what comes next for the two of us. I've stopped trying to predict it or force it or grieve the version of it I once wanted. What I do know is that I'm no longer making myself small to fit into a space someone else decided was mine. To anyone watching this who knows what it feels like to be the one who handles the details, manages the logistics, keeps everything running, while someone else gets the toast and the tears and the arm around the shoulder, I want to say this directly. The work you do in the quiet has value. It is seen by the right people, eventually, even when the wrong ones keep missing it. You don't have to burn anything down. You don't have to make a scene. You just have to keep building, keep your head clear, and trust that the rooms you've already earned will eventually speak for themselves. That's what happened to me. And I am not the same woman who hung coats at her father's dinner. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe. Only if you genuinely felt something watching it. And leave me a comment. Have you ever worked hard for someone who didn't notice until someone else did first? Tell me about it. I read every single one.